Good morning. We're going to continue with the Heart Sutra this morning. And last week I talked about the title. So this morning I'm going to talk about the first few lines. Avalokiteshvara bodhisattva, doing deep Prajna Paramita, clearly saw emptiness of all the five conditions, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. So let's take it line by line or word by word almost and see what the Heart Sutra is telling us. So the Avalokiteshvara bodhisattva, first of all, a bodhisattva is means one who's awakened or whose aim is to awaken, but not for oneself, but for the sake of all beings everywhere. And in Mahayana Buddhism, of which Zen is a part, we make an important distinction between someone who practices to attain individual liberation and the bodhisattva. So, in some instances, in the former case, after attaining realization, the arhat feels there's nothing left to do but to get off the wheel of causation, create no more karma. But you might get to this place where you see what this awakening is about, realizing one's true self, and feel that that's all that there is to do. That's the end of it. But the bodhisattva has realizations, but realizes that he or she or they cannot rest there. It's the beginning of practice, not the end. And the bodhisattva has made vows to not remain in the state of oneness until every creature, animate and inanimate, has had the same realization. So that's the emphasis in our Mahayana tradition of Zen, is that as a practitioner, we practice not for our own sake, but for the sake of all beings everywhere. And I did a little practice with Soen Nakagawa Roshi when he was alive. And he used to have his students chant in Japanese, namu bosa. Namu, I am, or being one with. And Dai is great, and Bosa is bodhisattva. Namu bosa. I am the great bodhisattva. And sometimes he would have his students chant that when they were walking, kinhin. And they would chant it over and over and over again. And sometimes during a session, they would chant it, for 20 minutes. And just chanting something like that, it begins to permeate your being, permeate your essence. But it's also, chanting a short phrase like that over and over again, like a mantra, can put you into some kind of a altered state as well as other forms of practice. And if you practice, you begin to realize that that's who you are, the great bodhisattva. And after every sitting, we chant the four great bodhisattva vows, which we'll chant at the end of this talk, to remind us that we are the great bodhisattva. So, namu bosa, namu bosa. And finally, one time, Soen said, well, that's too complicated. We're just going to do bosa. Get rid of the namu, just bosa. So we chanted bosa, great bodhisattva. And then he said, no, that's too complicated. Just bosa. So we chanted bosa, and then that was too complicated. Just bo. Just chant bo. Bo. Enlightened. Enlightened being, bodhisattva. Bosa. So Avalokiteshvara bodhisattva is one of the greatest bodhisattvas. She's often represented as female and embodies compassion. And her name is translated as she who hears the sounds of the world. She who hears the sounds of the world. She hears all the painful cries for help and has a wonderful ability to help all beings in danger and in misfortune. So Avalokiteshvara is a Sanskrit name, and in Chinese, she's called Guanyin or Guanyin. And in Japanese, she's known as Kannon or Kanzeon. And we chanted Hime Juku Kanin Yo. That's a chant to Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva or Kannon bosa, saying that we're one with Kannon Bodhisattva, and every moment is oneness with Kannon Bodhisattva. And our heart mind is one with Kannon Bodhisattva. And sometimes Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva is presented with 9 faces and 1,000 arms and eyes. The eyes are presented in the palm of the hand. And according to legend, as Avalokiteshvara looked down on the suffering of the world, her head literally burst open from all the suffering and pain that she observed. And her spiritual father, who was Amitabha Buddha, put the pieces back together as 9 new heads. And so she could see in all directions. And then put back together 1,000 arms. She grew 1,000 arms. And we have a koan in the book of Equanimity where Ungan asked Dogo, what does the great compassionate bodhisattva do with all of these manifold hands and eyes? Yeah. So that's a famous koan. So you can look it up. It's case 54. What does she do with all of her manifold hands and eyes. So, well, she's doing deep Prajna Paramita. That's one thing she's doing. And what is Prajna Paramita? We talked a little about that last week because that's in the title of this chant. Maha Prajna Paramita Heart Sutra. Prajna Paramita. So literally, Prajna is a wisdom. And Paramita means to go to the other shore. So Prajna Paramita is the wisdom which takes us from the shore of delusion to the shore of enlightenment. But Prajna Paramita is also venerated as the mother of all the Buddhas. All of the Buddhas sprung forth from Prajna Paramita. This wisdom that liberates all beings. And the Buddhas are the manifestation of Prajna Paramita. So the verse says, Avalokiteshvara bodhisattva doing deep Prajna Paramita. So it's like a practice, you know. But we could also interpret this line as saying that Avalokiteshvara bodhisattva being deep Prajna Paramita. She's the manifestation of Prajna Paramita. It infuses every pore, every hair, and every bone of her being. Thus, everything she does is also Prajna Paramita. And she doesn't dwell in the state of oneness or emptiness. So everything she does is a manifestation of compassion. And that's what my teacher taught me, that compassion is the functioning of wisdom. Wisdom as such is just seeing clearly. And by itself, it doesn't have any power to do anything. So how does it function in the world? And seeing clearly, or hearing clearly, hearing all the sounds and seeing all the sights, then this compassion naturally arises. One wants to help. One wants to assist in any way one can, or to serve. So you could say that Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva clearly saw the emptiness of all things. Well, that's what it says in the second line. She says, clearly saw emptiness of all the five conditions. Now, excuse me. Emptiness is an important word in this sutra. It occurs over and over again. And it's an important word in Zen. But it's probably one of the most misunderstood words in our practice as well. So people who don't practice Zen, because of the emphasis on emptiness, say that we're a nihilistic practice, that everything is empty of any meaning, that's devoid of any meaning, and there's no values or beliefs. and that existence is senseless and useless because it's all empty. Well, that's the way we ordinarily use the word. Is when we say we feel empty, that means we don't find any meaning in our lives. So maybe there needs to be a better word, but of course, Shunyata is the Sanskrit word, and the Japanese word is ku. But this nihilistic attribute to Zen really has nothing to do with Zen. And it certainly doesn't have anything to do with emptiness as we understand it. So the Sanskrit word shunyata literally means void or emptiness, and ku can actually be translated as the sky, the Japanese word, sky. And Dogen wrote a fascicle called Koku, which means empty sky. So clouds appear and disappear, but the sky is not touched. So another way to look at Shunyata is that it's everything as it is. So it could be just as easily translated as fullness. But whatever notion we have of it, that's not it, because it's everything as it is. So why do we use the word emptiness? So it means that everything is devoid of any fixed attribute or quality. It's empty of any fixed attribute. So nothing can be nailed down as fixed because it's always changing. And sometimes emptiness is used as a synonym for impermanence, constantly changing. I was just listening to a podcast by Father Thomas Keating, who was the abbot of Snowmass Monastery up near Aspen, which is a Benedictine monastery, and he's died a few years ago. But he was saying he liked the Buddhist concept of he didn't use a word as a nen. A nen is a moment in the end, just a moment, and he said that everything changes in a nen. And he said a nen was a 69th of a second, but I don't know if that's true. I read that maybe it might have been in Dogen, that a nen is the amount of time it takes a healthy young man to snap his fingers. So is that a 60? I'm not a young man, but is that a 69th? Maybe mine is a 29th of a second. So what happens in a nen? It means that the world collapses and then is totally recreated. Yeah. So that's why it's empty, because it's not fixed. You can't say that it's this quality or this size or this color, because it's constantly changing. So when we say something's empty, it's empty of any fixed quality. And that's the nature of everything. So Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva saw emptiness of the five conditions. So the translation conditions is translated from the Sanskrit word Skandas, or the five aspects, you know. And supposedly that's a description of how we see ourselves, how we see one another. It's one description of how to categorize the biological functioning and the external physical appearance, and then the psychological and mental activity of a person. So the first of the 5 Skandas, or 5 conditions, is form. And that refers to the physical appearance of everything. And of course, as you know, later on in the Heart Sutra, it says form is emptiness. Right? Actually, so it's looking at this first skanda in a little more detail, but all of the skandas are empty. And the second one is feelings and sensations. They're also empty. So like there's the story of the student who went to the Zen master who said, "I'm always angry." He says, "Can you help me?" And he says, "Yeah, bring me your anger." He says, "Oh, I'm not angry right now." He said, "Well, what's the problem?" So what is it that triggers the anger? It's always changing. So the third is our perceptions and our thoughts. Again, they're empty. So that's one of the problems that we have is, we have these stories that how we describe everything, and usually the stories don't have anything to do with it. We hold on to the stories, and they make us miserable. So how do you distinguish between the stories and reality? I read this quote from Abraham Lincoln. I may have mentioned it before. He says, "We can be discouraged that a rose bush has thorns, or we can rejoice that a thorn bush has roses." So always we have a story about everything. So what's the truth? What's the reality? And our stories keep changing, according to our perception. So the fourth skanda refers to volition, impulse, and reaction, and it's associated with karma, our propensity to work, to do things in a certain way, which is also related to ethics and morality. So you could say the fourth skanda is our conditioning. And if we use our awareness, if we practice Prajna Paramita, we can we practice it and really become aware of the first 3 skandas. I mentioned of form and feelings and perceptions and thoughts. We can affect the fourth one, which is our karma, our conditioning. But it takes practice and awareness. And the fifth is consciousness and comprises the entire psychological realm. So that's empty too. So our whole consciousness is constantly changing. But we identify with it, and obviously it's just a small part of reality. Then the next line says, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. So seeing that all of the conditions are empty relieves misfortune and pain. It doesn't just relieve it, it completely relieves it. So, but being enlightened doesn't put a literal end to pain. Suppose I'm enlightened, hypothetically speaking, and I gash my hand and blood spurts out, and it's painful. But that is Prajna wisdom right there. I don't look at it and say this is good or bad, that it's evil or saintly. I just take care of it. And I'm not restricted by the notions of what it is. I take care of it directly. So to realize enlightenment does not put a literal end to suffering or pain as we perceive it to be prior to enlightenment. What is realized is that suffering itself and pain itself is the functioning of the enlightened way. Having realized this, we know how to take care of it. Many people think that after practicing for a while, there'll be no more problems. It's not that there's no more problems. It's just that we can deal with them in a more refined way. And when Uman said every day is a good day, he didn't mean that you aren't going to have any problems. He didn't mean that you're not going to have any difficulties. Didn't mean that you're not going to have any misunderstandings. He means that all of these problems and difficulties are the functioning of Prajna Paramita. And it's good, not in the sense of good versus bad, but it's good in the sense as that's just what it is. And as I mentioned many times, my teacher would add a little appendage to that and say every day is a good day, even when you're having difficulties. Even a bad hair day is a good day. But when we add our ideas to this reality, then problems appear. Let's consider the 5 Skandas and how they appear when we don't realize their emptiness. Associated with form is ignorance in the sense of darkness. Enlightenment is the light that illuminates darkness. Ignorance is not seeing clearly or ignoring things that are in front of you. And associated with the second skanda of sensation is pride, which arises out of the ignorance. Then associated with perception is desire, which arises out of the pride. Then associated with volition is jealousy, which arises from desire. And then associated with consciousness is anger, which arises from jealousy. And all of this occurs because of not seeing the emptiness of all the skandhas. And we get caught in this cycle, of greed, anger, ignorance, pride, jealousy. Bernie Glassman used to tell a story to illustrate how this can occur, and some of you have heard me tell it before. He said, suppose there's 2 hands and they think of themselves as separate entities, or 2 hands of the same body. And he gives them names. Let's call them Sam and Dave. Okay. And if somebody gives me money and Sam grabs it, Dave over here is jealous. Sam has the money. So Dave is ignorant of the fact that it's one body. He has pride in the fact that he's Dave and that the other is only Sam. But Dave desires the money, but Sam got it. So out of that desire comes jealousy, and out of the jealousy comes anger, until Dave finally attacks Sam. So one hand attacks the other. And who suffers? I do, because of these crazy hands. This type of drama goes on in the history of the world. It's not so difficult to apply it to situations going on right now. But when we understand or experience or embody or manifest emptiness, the small self is transformed to the one body, and jealousy is transformed to love and support, and all of these poisons are transformed. So Avalokiteshvara bodhisattva relieved all of the pain and suffering in the world by becoming the pain, becoming one with it. And when she became one with it, her head exploded. And to realize emptiness means to realize that everything is changing, which means that everything is going to die this very instant. Each of us is a time bomb. We're each going to die the next instant. So we're doing the best we can this instant. We must do the best we can each instant, as that instant is our last. Yugen has a course that he teaches. They're going to live for, depends on how long the course is, right? If the course is a year, you're going to live a year. If it's 6 months, you're going to live 6 months. Yeah. But we have to do the best as if each instant is our last. Because what is it?